Hey, good day, everybody. This is Marcel2. Welcome to another edition of Sports Inquirer Show. We're recording this on May 13th, 2020. Hope all of you are well and safe out there in the world, wherever you're listening to our show. Things are going normal as usual here in the metro Atlanta area. The state has opened up a little bit more, so we are able to do some more activities, maybe go to the park a little bit more and do some other things. But besides that, trying to stay home and be safe and do my activities from home like all of you, which includes recording another edition of our show. On today's broadcast, we'll do our usual, how it's been going. We'll do a coronavirus update. Some leagues and associations are starting to open up, so we'll talk about those. We'll discuss baseball, Major League Baseball, with the Beanball portion of our show. Looks like they're trying to return in July. We'll break that down. We'll do verbal submission. UFC 249 took place. I have some thoughts on that. And also the Zone Blitz. We'll discuss the NFL schedule that was announced last week. We haven't done a show since then. MLS soccer in our portion of the show. We'll discuss soccer around the world as well. Start opening things up. And we'll touch on The Last Dance a little bit at the end, the Chicago's Bulls documentary. Because everyone else is talking about it, I guess I have to as well. But no, it's been a good documentary, and continue to see the Bulls, especially Michael Jordan, and just their run in the 90s. But as always, we want to follow everything that we're doing. Head to the mothership, sportsinquirer.net, premier site for news and notes in the world of sports. You get all of our archived shows, such as the Sports Inquirer Show, verbal submission, and things like that. You can also go to Twitter and Instagram, Sports Inquirer, all one word. You do a search on there. You can subscribe to there and like us. And same thing with Facebook. You go to our page, The Sports Inquirer or Sports Inquirer. We have two separate pages there. You go to either one of those. You like what we're doing. You get updates every time we do a post. So that's a really great way to follow everything that we are doing. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube and SoundCloud under The Sports Inquirer. You go to any one of those pages and you'll be able to get consistent updates on everything that we do. And also, if you go to our page itself, you can also do a like on there, and every time we do a post, you get an update. I guess the theme of that is every time you like or subscribe to anything that we do, you'll be able to get an update on all of our content. So that is highly recommended. I always tell people to do that because that is a really great way to follow up everything that is going on. As far as what's going on in the world of sports, we're still in the coronavirus specter of everything that's going on. But you are starting to see some leagues make announcements and make their returns. We'll start with racing, auto racing. NASCAR is going to race in Darlington on May 17th, which is this upcoming weekend. The IndyCar Series, they're going to go at Texas Motor Speedway on June 6th. I guess the logistics of auto racing, the problem with that one is the whole theme we've been talking about, and this is not sports related, but social distancing. That's been the biggest theme everyone's talked about. It's very tough to have social distancing in the auto world because you have pit crews all next to each other, and everyone looks at the drivers themselves, say they're in their individual cars. They're not going to be in conflict with each other as far as the virus spreading and all of that. But you have pit crews of dozens of guys between mechanics and engineers and all the crew chiefs, all of them together in one condensed area working on a car. That's not, you're closer than 6 feet apart. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. And we'll talk about another sport where it's even closer than that in a more physical way that just took place this past weekend. But as far as the fans not going, I don't think that's the biggest issue as far as that goes. We've seen races before that were delayed due to rain or other conditions, and they had to go the next day, and there's no one in the stands. It's not the worst visual. I think racing is better anyway on television. I mean, it's great to be on the track or at the stadium. You want people to be there, but I think that you can get away with that. We see qualifying all the time. There's no one in the stands there. So I think that's not an issue as far as that goes. So the visuals should not be a problem there. Golf's another one that has started to make its presence felt as far as making announcements of when it will return. The PGA Tour, as recording this, plans to come back on June 11th at Fort Worth, Texas for the Charles Schwab Challenge. So they're going to implement some things as well. Golf, probably no fans will be there as well. Now, the thing about golf, you can kind of keep your distance there. Now, there's the caddy and the golfer. There's interaction there. Obviously, they're next to each other with club selections, carrying the bag and all of that. So there's not much separation there. But as far as competitors themselves, they can really be apart from each other more than 6 feet if you're doing a round with somebody. So I think that one can work. On the LGPA as well, I think their plans are to be in July. I don't think they've announced an actual date of their return, but LPGA is making a target of July at some point. So I think those sports have the chance to be okay because those are relatively individual sports, and that's where you have more ability to do some things. Now, their issues, they have issues like everyone else, but as opposed to basketball and hockey and football, where in those sports you have direct hand-to-hand interaction, fighting or combat, not UFC fighting, but you know what I'm saying. They are all you're guarding somebody, you're hitting somebody right up against each other, and you have referees as well, right up against the players and coaching staffs and the benches. Everyone's sitting next to each other, and on the bench there's no distance separation there. So you add all of that up. The team sports are ones that have to consider all of these things. So that's where you have to make those considerations. Now, baseball's starting to try to make their situation more tangible. The owners have come up with a proposed plan that they'll play an 82 game season. As a matter of fact, I will search it right now because, let's see. I think what they're going to change, let's see, proposed plan. We're doing it on the fly because rules are on the whatever right now. Because I want to get the exact games right. Let's see, where is it at? Now, what the essence is, it's a condensed season. You're going to have a lot of divisional play. You'll play your team in your division. We'll say the Atlanta Braves, since we're based in Atlanta. The Atlanta Braves will play each of their NL East opponents up to 12 to 14 times, around that range. And then the rest of their games would be against the corresponding division in the American League. So they'll play teams in the American League East, such as Tampa, Baltimore, the Yankees, Red Sox, Toronto. You get the idea. So there's less travel, because that's the biggest thing I've been saying about baseball from the start, all the sports, but it's particularly baseball because they're in the infancy of their season, while the NBA and NHL are trying to wrap up their seasons. It's the travel factor. Now, I know you say that they have charter jets, and they do, and so that helps the cause as far as the flights, but say you're Atlanta, you're in this environment, you're flying up to Philadelphia, you carry whatever you have from Atlanta to Philadelphia, from Georgia to Pennsylvania. You play your games, and you carry from Pennsylvania to New York and everything in between. I mean, it turns into, that's how plagues start. That's really how this virus has become infected. People flying from whatever you want to say about if it was from China or wherever. It started somewhere, and people traveling and moving around has made it spread just because of the way things are. So baseball has to deal with that quite a bit. They're going to try to limit, I guess, the time people will be on the road as far as the divisions go. There's going to be a universal designated hitter. National League supporters, I know they're very old school. They don't like designated hitter. Just deal with it for 2020, just the way the rules are going right now. I think 7 playoff teams are in the proposal. In essence, they want to get started by July. Around July 4th, there'll be a very festive time. And I think by July, the majority of the states in our country are going to be open. When I say open, I say it in quotations. What does that mean? Does that mean that you can go to your favorite restaurant? I don't know, but I think you'll be able to go to supermarkets. You'll be able to, which you're already able to do right now anyway. You can go to just some entities that that you would normally go to. And I think it's going to get to the point where these states are going to allow people to have open situations, and it's going to be up to people, and that's kind of how we have to deal with this in general. And I think as sports, they're public entities, so when I say all of these sports, there's no fans, by the way. Whatever I'm talking about baseball, hockey, NBA. There are no fans at any of these things, So that's just the way it's going to be. I know LeBron James wants to have no, and I'm not picking on him, but I state him because he's been very vocal about it, and it's LeBron James. He has a very powerful voice, saying that sports won't be same without the fans. We can't play without the fans. I understand his perspective, and I agree with his approach. He wants to have the fans there. We all want to be there, but I think you have to look at it logically and realize that it's just not viable. Now, and let me wrap up on baseball, but that's a proposal that's out there right now. We've had so many proposals, from playing all the games at spring training facilities in Arizona and in Florida to playing at neutral sites that have dome stadiums so that we can play into November and December. So we're talking about Houston, Tampa, Arizona, teams like that have domes. Even Minnesota doesn't have a dome anymore. But you get what I'm saying. Like you look at places, Toronto, for maybe some of the northern teams. So you're starting to hear. You've heard so many proposals as far as Major League Baseball goes. But for the owners to have a tangible plan presented to the union is something that is newsworthy. And unfortunately, though, I think the pettiness of the union and the owners may really kind of ruin this, because you're already hearing with Tony Clark, the head of the Players Association for baseball, discussing things and making comparisons to war and not wanting their guys to be out there and for the battle of their lives, using hyperbolic language. You have to understand the tension between the Players Association of Major League Baseball and the ownership is very strong. Plus, they have a CBA negotiation that they're in the middle of. So the pettiness of it, and really arguing over hundreds of millions of dollars when there are people literally unemployed right now and are struggling to make finances and are in a really bad spot, not to mention health-wise. It's a very tough deal when you have that going on and you have players and owners bickering over hundreds of thousands of dollars and arbitration and things like that. But baseball's always been like that. We saw them throw away an entire baseball season in 1994. That's just the way the sport works. Now, would that be smart to have this approach at this time of our lives? No, but baseball has to do baseball. I think ultimately they'll sell on. Oh, and it splits 50-50, and that's where the kind of contention comes from. And I just think, honestly, what they need to end up doing in all the sports, just make it prorated. Look, did you play a full 182 games or 62 games this year? No, but what was your average per game, whatever it breaks down to? That's what you make. It's that simple. But it just if you were made, we'll make it simple. If you make $10,000 per game, you'll make $10,000 per game in 162 game season, whatever it breaks down to. You make that for the 82 game season. So just multiply that per game by 82, and you keep it moving. If you want to throw a little bit of extra incentive for the postseason teams, sure. And that's what you have to realize as well. Players get paid for the regular season. They get a little postseason bonus, in general, but most of their money, salary-wise, is made in the regular season. And I know there are times as well, because the money may not be the same due to the gates. Now, and that's where the owners are. They're not going to make as much money as they normally would, because no fans, no gates. The TV deal may not be as strong for this year as it normally would be. So the owners don't want to take too much of a bath in it. And the players, understandably, want to come back to a settled and safe situation, because they're the ones out there competing and putting themselves on the physical line. So that, and basketball is dealing with the same thing, but football is, well, all the sports are dealing with it. Baseball has been very aggressive with the making it public, which we knew it would, because baseball has the media entity that, or just the followers of the sport and the media there are just a lot of leaks and just a lot of information out there. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing some tensions between the owners and the players. But there's a proposal out there, so we'll see what happens the next time we do a show. And yeah, I'll touch on basketball real quick as well, since I did bring it up. It's looking more and more like, and as I said, this is a fluid situation, but I think it's going to be very tough for guys to now come back. I thought they'd get a few regular season games in. I don't think that's going to happen right now. I think it's going to be very tough to have teams like the Kings and the Hawks and squads like that that are the bottom of the league as far as standings go, make them come back to their facility, play 4 or 5 games, and then go back home. I think it'd be good for the playoff teams to get a few games to work in work in shape and back in form, before they get into the postseason play. But you need teams to be in the spot for that, and it does matter too as far as playoff positioning, and it also matters for lottery for the the draft. So that does matter. You want to get as many games in to make it as objective as possible. But I think it's going to be very tough to see the league play those regular season games. Now, do I see them playing all their playoff games in Las Vegas or in Orlando? Because that's been thrown out there. That's a little bit tough. I think you want to have some sort of a home court advantage, even if there are no fans in the stands. Just the fact that you are a top seed, you don't have to travel. I mean, that is a home field or home court advantage in some way. But I think that's the direction that you're starting to see them go. Hockey is a little bit similar, and the NBA's deal with it as well, because the Raptors are going to be a playoff team. Canada, their restrictions are very different than the United States. They are, I don't want to paint a broad brush over the whole thing, but especially in Toronto and then the Ontario province, they seem to be more leaning towards a lockdown state than their American counterparts, whether it's nationally or statewide. So the Toronto Blue Jays and the Raptors, just in the NBA and MLB, and then obviously the Canadian teams in the NHL, where do you go with that? Do you have those teams stay in the United States? Do they have maybe some areas, if you're Toronto-based teams, do you go towards New York, or if you're Michigan? How do you do that? If you're in Vancouver, do you go to the state of Washington because you're a few hours away at the border? You get what I'm saying with this. How do you deal with that? So that's something we have to consider as well. But all of that said, this will now be our final talk about leagues speculating. No, we'll do soccer as well. I'll talk about MLS since we're talking about that. And then we talk about some actual on-the-field activities, or at least the mixed martial arts on the octagon activities. Soccer's the same deal with MLS and Major League Soccer. Started doing some individual workouts. Starting to see some teams out there trying to get some of those in. They're in a similar deal as all the other sports that I've mentioned. So it's not, they're more in the line of Major League Baseball. They're kind of in between, honestly, because they got about 2 or 3 regular season games in before all of this started. So they're not exactly at the end of their year, but they're not at the very beginning. Like, they've already played some games. It's not like Major League Baseball. But you're already seeing some issues there as well. Doug Roberson, a colleague of ours with the AJC, has already talked about Atlanta Journal-Constitution and covers the Atlanta United in a great way, or has already talked about just the labor union. They just signed a big CBA deal. I think it's a 5-year deal a few months ago, but now they're starting to deal with the same deal with Major League Baseball as far as the players and how much money is allocated towards them. It's a very touchy situation because they just got through this new deal, but everything has changed as far as TV and travel and revenue and all of those things. Plus, with Major League Soccer, yes, there's a Canadian aspect, as we discussed with some of the other sports, but you have a lot of international players, and a good amount of them are in their other countries. So how do you get them back into the United States as far as health wise and traveling and all that stuff? There's a lot going on there. I think our next show will break that down a little bit further as far as specifics of it, because MLS has been pretty straightforward with new announcements as far as everything goes there. But just wanted to make a note on that before we talk about the UFC 249 event in the verbal submission portion of our show, which is right now. Yeah, think about that. And for the UFC, they had their first fight, or first event, or second event technically, since the coronavirus epidemic in Florida, because Florida has made their states valuable for essential businesses, including mixed martial arts and UFC and World Wrestling Entertainment and AEW All Elite Wrestling. They've been having events now in the states, and UFC decided to have their events in Jacksonville on Saturday, this past Saturday. The specter of the virus was strong, though. Jacare, who's a fighter, he tested two people from his entourage tested positive for the coronavirus after the weigh-in, and his fight with Uriah Hall was canceled. And they had the weigh-ins, they had all the fighters wearing masks and trying to social distance, yet he tested positive. So he was sent home, and his fight with Uriah Hall was canceled, but the event still went on. And I know they tested all of the guys, including the announcers, the camera crew, the producers, the fighters themselves, of course, and the trainers. And they said no one else had the virus. This virus is a tricky one, because there have been stories of, and this is nothing political, but it's true, people who did not test positive for the virus, and one test, the very next day they test for it and they have the virus, or the virus is in, someone has it, but it doesn't show up on the test, and they're like a silent carrier of it. My fear, before we get to the fights themselves, is that some of those people at the event don't have the virus. They tested, they didn't have the virus, and we're going to hear through 2-3 days later, I mean, we're at Wednesday, that they had the virus, or guys are going to come back, and that's my biggest fear. And UFC, they're doubling down or tripling down, because they have an event tonight on the 13th, and they're going to have an event on the 16th on Saturday. So they're doing 3 events in 7 days from the same location. That's just a recipe for something not very good happening. But they decided they still continue with the fights. I personally would have canceled the event, and I'm going to say that right now, even after seeing the fights, and it was great seeing UFC action. But once Jacare tested positive for the coronavirus, I would have canceled the event. It's unfortunate because people traveled from all around the world, literally to do it. But that's just such a tough deal. But a league had to do it, and UFC is the first one. And Dana White, the commissioner, or president, whatever you want to call him, very close ties to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump literally sent a message of appreciation to the fighters in the video, and to Dana White and the staff. I mean, their relationship, that's not something that's very public. It's very obvious, and I think, and obviously with World Wrestling Entertainment, Vince McMahon, the president, CEO, the Lord there, him and Donald Trump have a tight relationship, especially if you look at the business side of it with the government in Florida and Linda McMahon. The ties are very, very obvious. So, when President Trump, he's the president, love him or hate him, when he wants something to happen, it happens. And UFC and WWE having ties to him in a personal way, before he was even president, these relationships go back years, and with the McMahons, decades. So this is nothing new. We've already known this. They're going to have some fights that go on there. And that's why I look at these events, and we'll talk about the fights in a second, but it's very tough to analyze these fights, because I will say this, I'm not taking away victories from guys, and men and women. You step in the octagon, you compete, that's what you came in. There are no excuses as far as winning or lose, or no excuse for losing. But it just looked very odd with Tony Ferguson. We'll start with the championship match with Justin Gaethje. Gaethje defeated Tony Ferguson for the interim lightweight title in the fifth round TKO. Now Gaethje earned the victory. It was very dominant throughout the match. Ferguson got a nice uppercut in midway through the fight that staggered Justin, but overall, Ferguson, he did not look himself. Came in on a long winning streak. It should have been him and Khabib for the title, but Khabib is in Russia right now or in Europe, so he's not able to travel to the event. So Gaethje stepped in, won the championship, and that's the best Justin has looked in the UFC. So credit to him overall. But Ferguson, you have to wonder, he an opponent change. He's done. I think he did an extra weight cut. That'll really affect you. And Ferguson, for a man in his mid-30s, see his fighting style is very tiresome in training and is very tough. I don't think he came into the fight in his best condition. Now, I said Gaethje won the fight. There should not be an asterisk there, but it does make you wonder. And Ferguson could have came in 100% healthy and still lost the fight. I think Gaethje just pitched that, not a perfect game, but it just fought that well. But just looking at that fight as it was going on, you just realize by the second or third round, it was like Ferguson is just not there. And the fight really could have been stopped earlier, especially late in the fourth round, and it ended up getting stopped in the fifth. But that was just looking at that fight overall. You kind of wondered about that. I was like, wow, what's going on here? But overall, I mean, that was interesting. Henry Cejudo defeated Dominic Cruz to retain the bantamweight title. Second round TKO. I think Cejudo, once again, making his case maybe as the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, making his case, as I said, because, well, I shouldn't say that. I think he's making a case as the top combat artist. I mean, what I'm trying to say is if you combine his prep wrestling career in high school, he didn't wrestle in college. All he did was go and win a gold medal in the Olympics. He's won 2 UFC championships, 2 titles there. The man has done pretty much all you can if you look at combat sports. If you combine amateur wrestling and I consider Olympic wrestling pro wrestling, well, not like WWE pro wrestling. You get what I'm saying. But you consider that type of wrestling, grappling, and then you combine that with the UFC. I mean, the man it's a tremendous career for him. And he said he's retiring. I don't trust retirements after fights. I don't trust them with the post-fight press conference, the guys after they sit down for 20 or 30 minutes. I definitely don't trust a retirement in the ring or in the octagon. I mean, he stated some solid points where he's accomplished all you can. He talked about his family. I guess he's a family. He has a child, a young child, wants to spend time with the child, which is always a commendable act. But I think he's also looking for more money. It's contract negotiation. And the man does hold a championship, and he's a man right now, so he wants to. He defeated Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson. He's defeated Dominic Cruz. The man's, and in his weight class, he's probably had the top career of all time, and he wants more money, I'm assuming. So I look at boxers and mixed and MMA fighters, and they talk about retirements. Sure, I think they want to retire, but I look at the finances, and I just feel that if the right deal is made and negotiated, he'll be back there. And that's why his retirement, and I think the MMA community respects him and says, okay, he's retired. But we'll see a year from now when things are a little bit more, hopefully, when things are a little bit more settled and a nice financial offer is made to him, whether it's by the UFC or Bellator or some other form. Maybe he wants to jump back into the Olympics to 2021. Maybe he wants to go back to that level. You never know. I don't think the man is retired from competing in sports, but you never know with that. And then Francis Ngannou, TKO victory in the first round. At this stage, he's going to fight. You got to figure he's going to fight Stipe Miocic when he comes back from his injury, when those guys get together. Or maybe fights Daniel Cormier, another guy who says he's retired. Now, Cormier is in a different position. because he is older, and he's talked about once he reaches the age of 40, which I don't know if he's actually gotten there yet, he wants to retire. So the retirement talk from him has been a lot more public than it was with Henry Cejudo. But you got to think of Ngannou has some competitors out there. Another first round TKO. The man is and you look at, I think outside of Vitor Belfort and another fighter, are the top fighters in UFC history with first round knockouts. I mean, the man has done so much there. So we'll see what happens when he competes and he fights. And then we'll wrap up the Zone Blitz with the NFL and some news and notes from there. The schedule was announced, and let me just make some notes here. Yeah. So the schedule was announced. No surprises, really. Kansas City is going to open up at home against Houston on Thursday, September 10th. We talked about on our previous show, once they announce the schedule, now we can start doing a timetable of when the league wants to return. So they're going to try to return normally on September 10th as far as regular season. So what you can do is go back 4 or 5 weeks and look at when the preseason games will take place. So that means we're going to have pretty much most of August with preseason games. Preseason games means training camp. So I would expect guys to report to training camp if all is working or progressing towards the positive. I would say in early to mid-July. They may even make it a little later in late July. Post 4th of July, of course. Now, that's definitely happening. But maybe the last week of July, and that's when you start seeing training camp open. What that means is guys will report, they'll train, they'll do what they usually do. I don't think you're going to see the open training camps like we've been seeing the past few years with the fans being able to attend. That's not happening. But that's not. Yeah, I think they're going to lean against that anyway. But I think that's where the league is. And the good part is, as opposed to college sports, and we're starting to see a different league like the Mountain West that just announced today. And we'll talk about a little bit more on our next show. In essence, they may have online courses throughout the fall, which means there are going to be no students on campus. If there are no students on campus, there can be no players on campus. Therefore, you can't have football teams and volleyball teams, and I'm talking fall sports, and those are the main sports really in the fall. You can't have those sports going on in the college level, and students aren't even there. So that's where the parallel. So that's when we'll see what the other leagues do in that regard. And really, it's not up to the conferences. It's really up to the academic boards of each state. I mean, if we're here in Georgia, if Kennesaw State and Georgia Tech and Southern and Mercer and you go down the line, if there are no students on campus for the fall, there's going to be no sports in those respective colleges or universities. So that takes care of that. The NFL doesn't have to worry about that as much. They're professionals and all that stuff. But as I said, going back to the schedule, September 10th is the open, so you can kind of go back and look at when they want to have camp come in. Heavy amount of interconference games to start the season, and then division games at the end of the season. What that tells me is that even if they have to postpone maybe the first week or two of the season, they can't start until week 3 or 4. You're still going to get your 6 conference games or 6 division games. You're still going to get a good amount of your conference games, AFC and NFC. So I think if you have that, you can still say it's a relatively legitimate season in that regard. And I think that's what they want. I think even if it's, and the NFL has dealt with with condensed seasons for strikes and lockouts. We had 2 of them in the 80s. So they're used to playing 10 and 12 game seasons and then heading right into the playoffs. So that's where we haven't really had too much of that in the other sports. Now, baseball had that in 1981. They had a funky strike year. They played 2 halves of the season. So that was kind of different. And then even in 1995, when they came back from the strike, they didn't play 162 games. It was a little bit different. They had some week or 2 of non-action. But the NFL, they're used to, if it has to be a 12-game season, a 14-game season, they can work around that as opposed to the full 16 games. But when I looked at the schedule, I noticed that I think everything is still scheduled to be normal. And I think the reality we have to deal with is that there are not going to be fans in attendance in the NFL for the games. The players will still be there. They're still going to have that action, and that stinks. I mean, yeah, it's going to be tough. You don't want to see an empty Lambeau Field or empty Soldier Field. These great stadiums, different arenas, takes away that home field advantage. Las Vegas and Los Angeles, those teams are opening up new stadiums, and they're going to open up to an empty stadium. So you don't want to see that, but once again, that's the reality of what's going on there. But the league did announce the schedule, and that does give a sign that things are heading towards that direction. And that concludes today's show. Thanks for listening to what we are doing, and as always, follow everything that we're doing on the mothership, sportsinquirer.net. Twitter and Instagram, go to Sports Inquirer. That's all one word. Just do a search. You'll find us there. Facebook. Look us up on The Sports Inquirer and Sports Inquirer, and subscribe to us on YouTube and SoundCloud. We'll try to do another show within the next few days. We'll definitely do a verbal submission tomorrow because I'll break down the UFC fights a little bit more, and I'll touch on professional wrestling. There's been a lot going on in that world. So until next time, good fight, good night, and be